Okay, team. I have good news. We are almost done. If you're watching this video, then you're almost finished with the lecture material. Oops. Plugged my drawing board here. Let me plug that back in. Hopefully it's going to work. I need that. Yep, there she went. So this is the last PowerPoint, which you'll find in the last of the modules there underneath the evolution PowerPoint. And it says the Big Bang Theory and macroevolution. In this PowerPoint, it's relatively short. We're going to talk a little bit about the Big Bang Theory. We're going to watch a short video which tries to explain it. It's very complicated quantum physics. You could imagine trying to wrap your brain around. I'm not going to say that I completely understand it, but we'll do our best to try. Okay. It is currently the leading explanation for how the universe began. There was a beginning to the universe. That's right. At its simplest, it says that the universe as we know it started with a small singularity, and it's a little hard to grasp what that means. The video will help. Then inflated over the next 13.8 billion years to the cosmos that we know today. And they tell us, based upon background radiation, that the universe is still continuing to expand. So some of the things we don't know, quantum physics can demonstrate that this occurred. What we don't know is the cause, right? And so then this comes back to the idea of religion and, can you believe in the Big Bang Theory and still believe in God? Of course, you can just believe that God started it, right? So there's that, for those of you that might be wondering. Was there one Big Bang or were there multiple Big Bangs? Is this just one of many? We don't know. These are many, many very complicated things. At any rate, that is the idea, okay? And so let's watch this short video.
Everything, the Big Bang. The idea that the universe was suddenly born and is not infinite. Up to the middle of the 20th century, most scientists thought of the universe as infinite and ageless. Until Einstein's theory of relativity gave us a better understanding of gravity, and Edwin Hubble discovered that galaxies are moving apart from one another in a way that fits previous predictions. In 1964, by accident, cosmic background radiation was discovered, a relic of the early universe, which together with other observational evidence made the Big Bang the accepted theory in science. Since then, improved technology like the Hubble telescope has given us a pretty good picture of the Big Bang and the structure of the cosmos. Recent observations even seem to suggest that the expansion of the universe is accelerating. But how did this Big Bang work? How can something come from nothing? Let's explore what we know. We can ignore the beginning part for now. First of all, the Big Bang was not an explosion. It was all space, stretching everywhere, all at once. The universe started very, very, very small and quickly expanded to the size of a football. The universe didn't expand into anything. Space was just expanding into itself. The universe cannot expand into anything because the universe has no borders. There is, by definition, no outside the universe. The universe is all there is. In this hot, dense environment, energy manifested itself in particles that existed only for the tiniest glimpses of time. From gluons, pairs of quarks were created, which destroyed one another, perhaps after giving off more gluons. These found other short-lived quarks to interact with, forming new quark pairs and gluons again. Matter and energy were not just theoretically equivalent, it was so hot they were practically the same stuff. Somewhere around this time, matter won over antimatter. Today, we're left with almost all matter and nearly no antimatter at all. Somehow, 1,000,000,001 matter particles were formed for every 1 billion particles of antimatter. Instead of one massive ultimate force in the universe, there were now several refined versions of it acting under different rules. By now, the universe has stretched to 1 billion kilometers in diameter, which leads to a decrease in temperature. The cycle of quarks being born and converted back to energy suddenly stops. From now on, we work with what we have. Quarks begin forming new particles, hadrons, like protons and neutrons. There are many combinations of quarks that can form all sorts of hadrons, but only very few are reasonably stable for any length of time. Please take a moment to appreciate that by now, only 1 second has passed since the beginning of everything. The universe, which has grown to 100 billion kilometers, is now cold enough to allow most of the neutrons to decay into protons and form the first atom, hydrogen. Imagine the universe at this point as an extremely hot soup, 10 billion degrees Celsius, filled with countless particles and energy. Over the next few minutes, things cooled and settled down very fast. Atoms formed out of hadrons and electrons, making for a stable and electrically neutral environment. Some call this period the Dark Age, because there were no stars and the hydrogen gas didn't allow visible light to move around. But what's the meaning of visible light anyway, when there's nothing alive yet that could have eyes? When the hydrogen gas clumped together after millions of years and gravity put it under great pressure, stars and galaxies began to form. Their radiation dissolved the stable hydrogen gas into a plasma that still permeates the universe today and allows visible light to pass. Finally, there was light. Okay, but what about the part we didn't talk about? What happened right at the beginning? This part can be defined as the Big Bang. We don't know at all what happened here. At this point, our tools break down. Natural laws stop making sense. Time itself becomes wibbly-wobbly. To understand what happened here, we need a theory that unifies Einstein's relativity and quantum mechanics, something countless scientists are working on right now. But this leaves us with lots of unanswered questions. Were there universes before our own? Is this the first and only universe? What started the Big Bang, or did it just occur naturally, based on laws we don't understand yet? We don't know, and maybe we never will. But what we do know is that the universe as we know it started here and gave birth to particles, galaxies, stars, the Earth, and you. Since we ourselves are made of dead stars, we are not separate from the universe. We are part of it. You could even say that we are the universe's way of experiencing itself. So let's keep on experiencing it until there are no more questions to ask.
Okay, there you have it. So that's some pretty intense stuff, right? And so the idea is, you know, from this Big Bang, all the planets and stars were formed, including our planet, the Earth, and our star, the Sun, right? So from the Big Bang, we have to go to life, you know, and if you buy into evolution, evolution says that from non-living things, we would somehow get the cell, right? The cell being the smallest unit of life. So lots of experiments have been done. One of the most important experiments that was ever done was Stanley Miller's apparatus. And what Stanley Miller attempted to do, along with his graduate students, was to create this apparatus that mimicked or simulated the very early conditions on Earth. And so we know the Earth would have been very hot, unstable. It would have been water. And he thought about, you know, what would be, in addition to water, what would be some of the other things that were present on the Earth. His attempt was to see if he could generate organic compounds from inorganic compounds. That would be the first step in creating life, right? We learned all about the organic compounds and how they're the building blocks of living things. Well, in order to have a living thing, you have to have these organic compounds, and we would believe that they would not have originally existed on the earth. So you can see some of the things he put in the apparatus. There's an atmospheric compartment, which would mimic the atmosphere of early Earth. Would have been very unstable, lots of lightning and electrical storms we would have expected. And so he's adding sparks and, to simulate lightning here. And then there's a condenser, which cools the liquid, and then it goes back into the oceanic chamber. And so this is a circulating system, and he would turn it on and just let it run for days and months and years, okay? Every once in a while, they would sample the liquid to see what they got. So here's some of the things they put in there. What's this? Hydrogen gas, carbon dioxide, CH4 is methane. Here's ammonia, NH3, and nitrogen gas, and then of course water. Okay, these were the ingredients that they put in the original apparatus, along with oxygen. And so when they put the oxygen in there, they let this thing run for a really long time, and they got nothing. They could not seem to generate any sort of organic compounds. Well, it was actually one of his graduate students that said, well, why are you putting oxygen in there in the first place? Because there would have been no photosynthetic organisms on the earth, because there's nothing living on the earth at that time. It was when they removed the oxygen at the suggestion of this one student that things started to happen. And what started to happen was they started to generate organic compounds, including amino acids and nucleic acids, which is a really big deal, right? Why? Well, we can't have proteins without amino acids, and we can't have genetic material without nucleic acids. The other thing, and one of the nucleic acids they were able to generate was ATP. That's a huge deal, right? Because we know that all living things use this molecule ATP. Back in the day, they didn't have a very sophisticated way of measuring what amino acids they got. They just knew that they got some, but they saved these samples. And then when the technology got better and better with gas chromatography primarily, where you can just take something and shoot it into this machine and it will literally analyze it and tell you what's in it, they found out they got all 20 amino acids, which is a really big deal, okay? So did they create life? No, they didn't create life, but they did create the building blocks of life from purely inorganic compounds. And this demonstrates that it's possible, you know, that you could get organic compounds from inorganic. Oops. So what did Miller demonstrate? He demonstrated that it was possible to get organic compounds from inorganic compounds. He generated short-chain polypeptides and nucleic acids in his experiment, among others. Again, not only did he get all 20 amino acids, but some of them started to form these polypeptide chains, which obviously would be the precursor to proteins, right? And then obviously the nucleic acids would be extremely important in this process. So that was a big deal. Now, of course, humans have been trying to create life from non-life. As long as, you know, we've had science, there have been people researching this and trying to understand how from these organic compounds we could get life, you know, living cells. And then, of course, once you have a living cell, then you can, the laws of evolution apply, and, you know, we see these things perhaps becoming more complex over time. So this is an interesting slide. As far as humans have gotten in creating or trying to create a living thing in a lab setting is with these self-replicating RNA systems. And so we can talk a little bit about this slide. It says, before light evolved, the simple molecules of the Earth's atmosphere combined to form more complex molecules. The energy that drove these chemical reactions may have come from lightning and forms of geothermal energy. So we know there was probably lots of volcanic activity and also lightning. From there, we get spontaneous formation of lipids, carbohydrates, amino acids, proteins, nucleotides under abiotic conditions. Abiotic meaning pre-life conditions, okay? And then what we have are the formation of these lipid spheres around RNA systems. And so it's a little bit complicated, but let's talk about it for a second. What we have is and what they've actually been able to create in the lab. Is a lipid sphere. And inside of that is a little self-replicating bit of RNA. And, you know, that's as far as they've gotten. And, you know, that's pretty impressive, though, if you think about it. I mean, what does this remind you of? A virus, right? And we say viruses aren't living, but they're pretty close. And so, you know, when you have a self-replicating system enclosed in a selectively permeable protective lipid sphere, which is basically what we have here, we call that a protocell. And so they've been able to create these protocells in the lab, in a lab environment. And, you know, obviously we haven't been able to go from this to an actual living cell that has a metabolism. But, you know, my sense is it's probably a matter of time until they're going to, you know, be able to do this. And it's a little bit scary, you know, or we're tinkering with creating new living things in labs. It's a little, seems a little sketchy, but they are working on it. Okay. So that is an attempt to explain how we could potentially get cells from purely inorganic compounds, ultimately. What about, now we fast forward. We don't have time, sorry. I wish we did have time to do all of the macroevolution, but we really just don't have time because we're just about out of time in this class. The origin of humans is interesting in the sense that it is forever changing as we find new fossils. We have to constantly update this information. I like this one. This one is a little bit dated. It doesn't have all of the other, it doesn't have some of the newer species like Homo heidelbergensis and some of the ones that we found since this cladogram was made. This is called a cladogram. It's like a family tree or ancestral tree. And I'm going to tell you down here, are the Australopiths, which Australopithecus is one. These are the closest, the Australopiths are the closest non-Homo relative to the Homo genus. And so this is a genus, Australopithecus. I'm just abbreviating as piths. So we believe that we ultimately evolved, the Homo genus ultimately evolved from this group of ape-like creatures, okay? And you can see the timeline here. This is in millions of years. And so when you consider that the Earth is billions of years old, you know, this is relatively recently in terms of geologic time, right? And so you can follow the tree. You can see Homo erectus has a big branch here in Asia. You know, we know that Homo erectus from fossils is all over Asia from, you know, approximately 1.2 million years ago, all the way up almost to the present, but you can see they went extinct here about 100,000 years ago, okay? And then we follow this branch. Homo rhodesiensis is a close relative, and here are the Neanderthals, right here, Neanderthalensis, okay? And here's us up here at the top. You'll notice it appears that we evolved in Africa, and then we literally walked out of Africa to colonize Europe, Asia, and ultimately the Americas, you know, and you could see that this is possible due to land bridges that occurred. Now, this is very interesting. You see the spot right here, you know, 50,000 years ago, right? The Neanderthals and the humans existed, they coexisted in Europe, and we know this is true from fossil records. We don't know what happened. We don't know if the Neanderthals died out because of disease or because the Homo sapiens killed them all in war, in a war type scenario, or a combination of the two. But we know that, you know, there was this overlap. We do know there was probably inbreeding between Neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens. Some people, when they do the genetic testing, they find out that they do have some Neanderthal genes. You can be up to 2% Neanderthal in your genome, okay? So we could all potentially be hybrids between some other Homo species and Neanderthalensis, but suffice it to say, Homo sapiens was the one that survived, and that's what we are, right? And we, you know, dominated ultimately the entire Earth, all the different continents of the Earth as we spread. Okay. So we're constantly adding to the fossil record. When we find new species that are intermediate species, we give them new names. And so let me blow this up a little bit. I like this one. This is a newer one. It's more up to date. And you can see here's Homo sapiens down here, and this is going back in time. Let me get a writing utensil here. La pluma. Okay. So here we are down here. Now look, if you go up, and this is going back in time, right? Okay. And so here's Australopithecus africanus. And we believe that Australopithecus africanus is our most recent non-Homo relative right here. Here's Homo habilis. Now you might think Paranthropus, but that actually branched off. So see, there's a branch here, a divergent evolution type scenario. From Australopithecus, we got both Paranthropus and Homo habilis. So we're actually more closely related to Australopithecus than Paranthropus. It's just a little tricky to understand this, this cladogram, okay? So some of the major differences are brow ridge differences. You know, Australopithecus had huge brow ridges, very, very thick skulls. And you can see as we go down the line here, Homo habilis had a slightly larger brain. Now, keep in mind, the thicker the brow ridge, the less space there is for a cranium, you know, because it's the bone is taking up more space. So habilis had a larger brain and a less prominent brow ridge. And we believe that, you know, they had the ability to make simple tools and, you know, processing food, including meat. Okay. As we go down the line, we get Homo erectus, you know, smaller jaw or brow ridge still here compared to Homo habilis. And then we get to Neanderthalensis. You know, now we're getting to more sophisticated tools for hunting. Brain size increases even more, and then ultimately, this species Heidelbergensis was relatively recently discovered. It's kind of a newer species. There was a cave in Africa that they found, and the cave was like this. And if you have a chance, look it up in National Geographic. They'd had a big article about it. Cave was like this. And they were finding all these fossils in this big mouth of a cave. And then they got into the back, and it was so narrow that a human couldn't quite fit through. But they sent these robots, these drones through. And what they found was that in this other side, it was just full of fossilized, you know, human remains or Homo remains, okay? And so what they did was, this is a project that National Geographic did, they advertised for female spelunkers. Spelunkers are people that go in caves. And they said it almost has to be a female. No male is going to be able to fit through this tube. So what they're looking for is really skinny, petite females that aren't scared to crawl through this crazy cave system to get into the other side. And they actually recruited these two women, and these two women actually did it. They made their way through this tube, crawling through this tube and into this other chamber. And so then they ultimately got to be the ones to discover what was in there. And it was rich with fossils of Homo heidelbergensis. And, you know, they still speculated what was going on here, if maybe a flood washed them all in, or maybe this was some sort of burial ground where they were actually pushing the bodies through the tube and into this chamber in some sort of a funeral type ritual, but they'll never really know. As far as the evolution of Homo sapiens and this much larger brain, you know, this allows for the things like the capacity for art, symbolic thought, and full-blown language, right? And so one of the things that sets us apart is our language abilities, you know, complex language. So that is kind of the end, right? That is kind of the end. It is the end of the lecture. And one couple of just minor notes. We have a couple more slides. You know, one is the out of Africa theory. It's still, now there were two competing theories about this. One said that humans evolved, Homo sapiens evolved in different locations kind of simultaneously. You know, they said there's just no way that we walked out, that we all evolved in Africa and walked out. However, the current theory is that that's exactly what happened. The out of Africa theory is still the theory that holds the most weight in explaining human, human Homo sapiens colonizing the earth. So the idea is that we evolved in Africa about 250,000 years ago. Again, that's not very long when you think about geology and evolution, and the oldest life forms being 4.5 billion year old bacteria, which we have fossils of. You know, this is the last minute on the timeline of geology. At any rate, we believe that we evolved in Africa about 250,000 years ago, and then gradually migrated across the earth, replacing existing hominid species throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, or Europe, Asia, and ultimately the Americas. Okay. Now, one of the things that we don't know, although this is the current theory, is what we believe is what's called the multiple dispersion theory, where it didn't all happen at once. It's not like humans just walked out one day and started colonizing the earth. It probably occurred in waves, and the waves were triggered by climatic events. You know, as it got warmer and wetter, the oceans would rise, and these would put the land bridges underwater. And as it got colder and drier, the land bridges would reform, and you know, you kind of need a land bridge in order to colonize the earth, right? And so we believe that these waves occurred one after another of humans walking out of Africa. It's fascinating. If you're interested in more, I encourage you to do some research on your own, or take a anthropology class or an archaeology class. Fascinating stuff. Okay. As we find more fossils, we will keep adding to the record of pre-Homo sapiens species, and there are undoubtedly more, depending on the criteria that you use. Let me just say, this has been a really interesting semester for me. I've been teaching school for 20-something years, and I've always enjoyed the interaction, with the students. Haven't really gotten much of that this year, but I hope that you've at least enjoyed the class. And I just want to say thanks for, your attentiveness and kindness and understanding. This has not been the easiest thing in the world um, for me or for you, I'm sure. So let's just say we did our best, okay? And I appreciate all of your time and effort. Thank you very much. And maybe I'll see you on campus again one day soon. Bye-bye. Take care.